Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be chatting about more wasteful liberal tax spending, the Conservatives' proposed legislation to counter Trudeau's hate speech bill, the RCMP's use of emerging technologies to increase surveillance, a federal court allowing a lawsuit over the UNRWA funding in Palestine to proceed, Putin's war threats as Western allies consider allowing Ukraine to strike inside Russia, and Donald Trump facing a second assassination attempt in just 2 months.
This podcast is brought to you by Higher Health's organ supplements. Sourced from 100% grass-fed, grass-finished cattle raised by Canadian regenerative farmers, these supplements are designed to fill the nutrient gaps in our modern diets. Higher Health's, connecting people to real food.
All right, let's get started. So first off, we have more bad liberal spending, satellites, space travel, and sleeping bags. MP Michael Barrett has raised concerns over Prime Minister Trudeau's recent $2.14 billion loan to Telesat, aimed at providing internet to rural areas. Barrett contacted Elon Musk on X, formerly Twitter, asking how much Starlink would cost for the same purpose. Musk replied, saying it would be less than half the cost of Trudeau's plan, fueling criticisms that the government's funding is wasteful and inefficient. Meanwhile, the Department of National Defense spent $34.8 million on sleeping bags that proved inadequate for Canada's harsh winters. As a result, troops participating in a joint mission in Alaska had to reuse outdated bedrolls from the 1960s. In another controversy, the DND spent over $30,000 on an intersectional feminist review of Canada's space program, which suggested removing colonial terms like exploration and mankind. Critics argue this expenditure was unnecessary and misused taxpayer money on frivolous studies. So is there any more ineffective institution than the government when it comes to capital allocation?
I just don't understand how they get to keep doing this kind of stuff and there's no accountability. Like, I don't know how the satellite loan was above board, because if you just bid that out and he's saying it's half as much, then this seems like you just padded the pockets of one of your buddies. This is totally ridiculous. I mean, the sleeping bag thing is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That's wild. Canada is the second coldest country in the world next to Russia. You should have been planning for this. And the intersectional space travel thing is, that's now the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I was like, what are we doing? And they're like, you got to stop using these words. It's not equality. I'm like, you guys are mental. This is just so ridiculous. We continue to spend money on frivolous things to appease the far left and the weird liberal ideology that we're kind of liberal, rather, ideology we're living in today. I've come to expect that. You just hope that it doesn't cost you too much, but it's just stupid nonsense spending. But with the satellite specifically, that one's a little hard for me because really, that should have been bid out. Obviously, if Musk can do it at half the price, if people go, we don't want Musk to have that much power, no problem. Take other bids. But why is government money going as a loan? Because now all I think is that you're going to use these satellites and you're going to have control over these satellites. And somehow, and I'm an idiot, so this could be wrong, somehow you're going to be able to track and monitor what other people are doing because now you've got a government hand in on these satellites and whatever they're being used for. So for me, it just seems like a government surveillance play more than anything, which is a bit of a deeper problem. And that's not liberal or conservative. That's just fucking nonsense and it shouldn't be happening.
Well, one of the biggest critiques coming from, say, the left about the criticisms of this whole Telesat loan is that they say, well, we want to support Canadian businesses, right? Well, you go look at the shareholders of Telesat, and it's 93.7% owned by American shareholders.
Right.
Only 0.69% of the company is owned by Canadians. And if you go look at even the top 10 major shareholders of the corporation, they're all American. So anybody that stands to profit from this project is actually not Canadian.
I wonder which holding company Trudeau used to get his share of this company.
Yeah.
Because think, like, if the guy's wealth has gone from 1.5, and according to a recent thing on Forbes, it was over 300 million.
I was actually looking for that. I couldn't find it.
Okay. So from what I've seen, the research that I've done, it's gone from 1.5 to about 85, 86. Now you see figures that say it's 300-400 now, whatever it is. The reality is you don't go from 1 to 85 even. You don't even go from 1 to 10. You know, over 10 years of making 400,000 a year, you got to pay your taxes on that shit. Doesn't really track. Every time moves like this happen, it's what's the ulterior motive? And what's in it for this man? Because he's arguably the most hated man in Canada's history. Arguably, I put him up there right now. If you asked, I would say they would say yes, but I think he's too close. But even I think if you asked in like 20, 30 years, I still think he's the front runner, you know? So it is a little concerning, but sorry, back to your point.
But then even you just consider the fact that Starlink is already proven reliable. They have this technology, it's already available. So, okay, we're going to throw all of this money into building this whole new system to provide something that is already being provided.
Well, that's what I mean. At no government cost, if you go with a private contractor that is not a Canadian company, which is 0.69% owned.
Yeah, and then yeah, you move on to the military stuff when it comes to the sleeping bags. Like, if any other than, say, potentially Russia, I mean, that's actually been Russia's biggest defense is their cold winters for the last
Hollywood wars.
Yeah, but Napoleon couldn't do it, Hitler couldn't get past it, all of this. But next to that, then you should look at Canada as being the second most prepared to endure those kind of realities of like harsh winters and such. I mean, even actually, it's really weird. We even let China come and train in our winterlands so that they can get accustomed to the it's really weird.
Yes, that's odd.
I don't know why we would ever do that.
And well, you know what, just to further the perspective on their lack of preparedness here, this was for a joint this was for some sort of joint military exercise in Alaska.
Yeah.
It's not like it was in Toronto. So like you're going to be facing some of the harshest weather. So it's just, to me, it blows my mind.
But it's just crazy that they'll put $34.8 million into trying to develop sleeping bags. Again, you could probably go to Canadian Tire and get sleeping bags off the shelf that would have been adequate and done better than your ended up $35 million of funding.
Yeah, like I don't understand insulation well enough. Like I know enough about needing space, and I understand like insulating homes and stuff like that. Like you kind of need your air barriers and stuff. But like, just buy two. Like, yeah, we bought two for everybody from Canadian Tire. You're welcome. Cool, man. We saved $30 million. What the hell?
And then you look, again, just going back to the third aspect here with this whole intersectional feminist review of Canada's space program. Like, why are we allowing these ideologues into any space of authority? Like, these people should not... I'm sorry, if you have a problem with the word exploration... Like, you are a problem.
100%.
like the word is not a problem. You're the problem.
Oh, my God.
But, again, this goes to show that it's not...
Well, I don't even know why we do the studies. Why don't you just tell me what's offensive?
Yeah.
I don't even give you any. Just tell me words I can't use anymore. We'll just stop there. I don't need to do any research on this. You've got all the answers. Fucking psychos.
This goes so much further than just the Liberal government, though. This is the government apparatus as a whole. Our neighbors to the south, you know, we just saw that the U.S. government lost $2.7 trillion in taxpayer funds to fraud and improper payments since 2003.
It's wild.
That's a lot of money. And then you also consider even the fact of what was the number before the day before 9/11, the Pentagon was like, oh yeah, there's $2 trillion worth of spending that we just don't know where it went.
That 2.3 trillion over 20 years is over $100 billion a year.
That's so nuts.
Well, if you think about it, like, because yeah, if you think about it, Canada's federal budget before Trudeau was in the mid 200 range per year. So they're misplacing prior to Trudeau, because it was over the last 20 years, so I can use the math. They were losing 40% of our federal budget every year. That's wild. That's wild. You know what I mean? Losing, but you know what I mean? Yeah, it's wild.
No, but this just goes to show that I think Sowell was 100% right when he said the worst idea you can ever do is to put people in charge that bear no consequence, right? They lose the money. Nothing matters. It's not their money. And then they fail to do the program they set out to do. It's not a big deal. They weren't the ones that needed to rely on it anyways, right? So it's like, so they face no consequence for putting forward bad plans or losing capital. And it's just, they just keep going.
It's just a shame. And I just don't know how we get it under control. You and I look at a lot of these problems. It's easy to make fun of them because this is ridiculous. Like, it's ridiculous. This is such ridiculous oversight or bad ideology or just stupidity or corruption. Like, so it's easy, but you got to go, okay, how do we stop it though? Because this is another couple $billion+ It's like, what do we need to do so that Canadians or people in general in the West have any faith in their institution and their government anymore? And it just seems like it's so far out of hand. When you take America losing $100 billion a year since 2003, didn't matter who was in charge. That was the average. You might be able to figure a little more here and there depending who was in power, but just been mostly Democrat anyway. When you kind of look at that math, you just go, how do you rebuild any faith in these systems? It seems like they're just far too gone. It's kind of like, they say that there's always some sort of voter fraud in an election. We just don't know how much, but no one says there's none. No one says, no, no. Everybody go, yeah, there's definitely some. So when we think about government corruption and government overspending and lack of accountability, it's like, well, there's always some. We just kind of accept that. But the problem is, it seems like the sum is like 50%.
Yeah.
Or more. You know what I mean? And it's like, how do we sort of get a handle on this? Because the people making the decisions are always the ones who benefit. It's like you need collective benevolence. And why I say collective is like, it's got to be a new way of operating governments around the world. Because if you see what's happening in Europe, take Hungary and Poland prior to the recent election, even Turkey, people may think this is unpopular, but the way that they're operating their countries, I know they have their downsides, is actually much better for the citizens. Hungary with their, have 3 kids, don't pay income tax. We're going to rebuild our own population. We're not going to have open borders. Just sort of their checks and balances and how they're willing to push back against the European Union. But as soon as they do, what happens? They get ostracized and the EU freezes tens of billions of dollars of their assets. And that's why I said it needs to be collective. The whole political apparatus the wind needs to change. So obviously it starts national, but I think it's got to be beyond that for any really meaningful, lasting change. And I don't know, man, I'm just becoming more cynical. I'm having less faith in the system, but the problem is we have a system. We can't get away from it. You know what I mean? No matter where you go, you can't really avoid having this government apparatus in your face. And it seems that the bigger they just keep getting bigger and bigger. It's like the price of gold eventually just keeps going up. The price of housing just keeps going up. Your government just keeps getting bigger and more corrupt. I don't know how you fix it. I don't know how to repair it. It's depressing a little bit.
Well, you need a Malay type figure that just walks in here and says, we're axing everything except the necessities. Like, again, I think if government's going to exist, it should have 3 primary functions, which is 1, to uphold a border, which you need a military to do. Then you have provide court systems and protect private property. And then you would need some sort of policing system. But like all this other stuff, even when it comes to
removal and snow removal is not bad, but yeah.
But that's more on like a municipal level.
It is municipal for sure, yeah.
But even when it comes to, say, education, I don't think the government should be nearly as involved in education as it is.
Yeah.
We've seen when it comes to healthcare, it's our number 1 expenditure, and we rank like 10th out of 10 when you compare us to other advanced nations. So it's just like, I don't think that they're efficient in any of these things. And so you do need a Malay figure to come in that has the balls to just be like, no, I'm going to take the heat for ripping apart the gender studies education bureaucracy. Yeah. And then just take that heat and then show that it's the exact same thing as like what Elon did with Twitter. He walked in, he cut 80% of the staff. Everybody said that Twitter wouldn't last a week after him doing that. And now it's running more efficiently than it was before.
Of course.
Obviously, they have an income issue with advertising boycotts. But as far as like the platform running itself, they're adding more and more features to it with less people. Yep. So he's shown that, like most of this kind of stuff is just actually unnecessary.
I think the challenge you get here is, I totally agree with you. I think that's the right approach. I think the benefit you have in South America, like you get a Malay, and the advantage he has is there is chaos, there is above board corruption, and there's no real, like no one's hiding behind the curtain. It's all in front of you. You do get these oligarchies, you get these, sort of state censorship. Everybody kind of sees it. So if someone comes in and goes, no, we're going to cut all that shit. Kind of like Bukele in El Salvador, you know what I mean? He comes in and goes, no. We have high crime, bad corruption. Everyone's on the chopping block. Let's. So you can kind of act and behave that way. Problem here is everything's behind the curtain, and everything's about diplomacy, and everything's about all this nonsense. So it's like there's this big chasm you have to cross that is full of political ideology that runs as interference for someone to actually come in and do this without them being, kind of. I don't know what the right word is. You know how they talk about Trump. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think I agree with you. I just think we have this additional hurdle, this additional gap to sort of bridge, and I don't know how we get there. But I totally agree.
Yeah, I think I've even pointed out in an article on our Substack before how the whole idea of socialism is very ingrained within the Canadian subconscious. Like this idea that the government should be involved in all of these different sectors, and we are a socialist country at that point. So many of our most important sectors are pretty much completely, if not majorly owned or facilitated by the government. And so, yeah, we do have to get rid of that out of the kind of Canadian brain in a sense, which, and it was like a friend, asked me kind of like, oh, well, what would be your overarching goal with the podcast? Like, do you expect to bring about major change? And I was like, no, I don't want to set any goal ahead of me that I think might be an impossibility to hit, because then I'm kind of chasing something that I can't ever achieve. But for me, like, as long as everybody that listens to us walks away with a little bit more distrust and hatred for just the government as an institution, that's my goal. Like, as long as people are just kind of slowly changing their position from like, oh, the government is this benevolent institution that's here to provide for us and help us when things get tough, to the government is an inherently corrupt institution where power relies and psychopaths get magnetized to, then that's a win in my books. Just because we do on large scale need to change people's perspective towards the institution itself.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm a little bit more like, I totally agree with your perspective. I am a little bit more of like, hey, shoot for the stars. Let's try to, but that's just my nature. But anyway, yeah, sorry, moving on.
No, it's okay. So our next topic, we've got conservatives to propose legislation countering liberals' hate speech bill and block digital IDs. The Conservative Party has introduced legislation opposing the Liberal government's Bill C-63, which expands hate speech definitions and gives authority broader powers, including retroactive punishment. Critics label Bill C-63 as authoritarian, citing potential overreach under the guise of child protection. The Conservative counter legislation focuses on three key areas: updating criminal harassment laws to better address online abuse, protecting minors with privacy-preserving age verification systems without using controversial digital IDs, and criminalizing non-consensual AI-generated intimate images. They argue that digital IDs threaten privacy and risk enabling excessive surveillance. The Conservatives urge the Liberal government to abandon Bill C-63, warning that rejecting their proposal could position the Liberals and NDP as anti-free speech and proponents of digital surveillance. This sets the stage for a political clash over censorship, privacy, and free speech in Canada. So do you trust the Conservatives to police the internet without infringing on civil liberties?
I don't really trust anybody to be quite honest with you. However, that being said, I like to say sometimes you have to choose between two bad options. This is an easy one. You go with the conservative route because they're, not going down the line of the digital IDs. They're not doing some of the insane shit. The Minority Report meets 1984. They're just staying away from that stuff because it's insane, right? Like none of it is actually to accomplish the goal of protecting the vulnerable, like our children. You know what I mean? So I respect that they are pushing back against the egregious legislation, but I don't really trust anybody to do the job without any sort of, I don't know if corruption is the right word, with any sort of breach of privacy or maybe overreaching on censorship. That being said, I don't fully understand, just through a lack of experience, I don't fully understand the darkness that happens on these social platforms and what people are trying to do and what the real harassment and what the real child protection, like I actually don't. Like I can say it's pretty easy. We live in a world where you swipe left and swipe right and you go have sex with people. Like it's pretty simple for if you're in the dating world. So the reason I use that example is it's a bit extreme if you think about 20, 30 years ago, right? Now, with social media, there's a lot of ways to catfish people. There's a lot of ways to get people's information. There's a lot of ways to do some pretty nasty things. I don't actually understand the depths of what's happening on those platforms, and I don't understand what government legislation can do to stop that. I actually don't. So my perspective is this. I don't really trust anybody, but I think it would be good to understand, okay, if there's, just for argument's sake, if there's 5 bad things happening online, can government legislation cover all 5 of those and make it safer? Can they cover 2? Can they cover 1? Or are they just going to completely miss, which is what Bill C-63 was, a complete miss? I don't really know. I would like to have a deeper understanding of that before I said, hey, do we even need any of this? Because maybe we do. But again, back to sort of your question, I don't really trust anybody to do it.
Yeah, I think this play here might be less about trying to actually get this legislation passed and put these things in place rather than to expose the Trudeau government as what they are really hoping to get out of these things, which is the added control of speech and surveillance. So if you think about it, if they just put forward this bill and say, here, you can do all of these things that you want to do, like protect children and deal with AI generated stuff, and all you have to do is XYZ, and you take the whole speech policing and thought policing and like retroactive punishments out of this bill, and they decline it and they say no, then it shows that that's really what they want, is that added control.
So you think this has nothing to do with sorry. So you think this has little to do with policy and more to do with highlighting the liberals' insanity?
I think so. Because which is a good call, because instead of just say arguing online or taking them down, saying this is an authoritarian bill you're putting forward, it really does expose them if they take away the authoritarian aspect and say, here, we've revamped this in a way that we think will still achieve the goals you say without the censorship and without the authoritarianism. But then if they say no to that, then it shows that that's all they wanted in the first place.
So, but that doesn't, but to your question, do you trust the conservatives to censor the internet?
No, I wouldn't. But I'm wondering whether that's even their goal in the first place, whether that's actually something they want.
I understand that. I see the value in that.
But yeah, I wouldn't. I think my idea with this is, like, even in these scenarios where you can see that it would be justified, like, obviously you want to make sure that children are safe. I don't think there's really anybody except for child predators that would argue against that. But
what's that say about the liberals? See how this vote goes.
But one thing that I think Friedrich Hayek pointed out really well was that, you know, if you want to avoid having power used in an abusive way, then you also have to refrain from using it when it could, like, in strengthening that centralized power, when it could be seen as beneficial. You know, this goes to the Lord of the Rings, like Boromir with the ring thing. He's like, why don't we use the ring for good? It's like, you theoretically could, but the more you allow yourself to take that and use it, then the more likely you are to be corrupted by it. Or even when it comes to this kind of stuff, okay, let's even say, which I don't, but let's say that I believed the conservatives actually could police the internet in a understandable manner or whatever. That doesn't mean that I would trust the next person to come along. So I wouldn't want to give it to them knowing that the person after them could use it.
You never want those tools in place, because even if they're benevolent, the next guy, girl might not be. But actually, inevitably, they won't be. You just don't know how long it's going to take to get there. It could be right out of the gates, could be 4 years, could be 20 years, but either way, it's going to be a hammer and it's going to smash you.
Well, and to even actually, and then look at, like, the liberals' proposed version of this, where they get to, you know, retroactively punish people for whatever they do.
That's the most insane thing.
Again, it's very important. Let's tie this back into the first article we were talking about, where you see that the people in charge of these kind of things, the people that they would want at the helm of this online police brigade, would be the same type of people that are doing intersectional feminist reviews of our Canada space program and saying that words like exploration are oppressive and harmful.
Yes. I think the one thing that's really important to highlight is the person that would be in charge of this would be a liberal appointed executioner. That's insane. And these are the things that matter to them. Yeah. So we're going down a dangerous path with this, just in general. But I mean, like you said, maybe they're just doing this to call it the liberals, because at the end of the day, the conservatives are over a year away from being in office, and there's no way that this piece of legislation is actually going to be used. No one's going to pick it up. So no, that's a good point.
All right, let's move on to our next story, which we've got. RCMP reveals how it's using emerging technologies to fight crime, but what about our privacy? The RCMP has expanded its surveillance capabilities over the past 5 years, adopting advanced technologies that raise significant privacy concerns. These tools, while legally sanctioned, reflect a broader shift toward more invasive investigative methods. The RCMP now employs covert software to infiltrate digital devices, accessing communications, screenshots, and even activating cameras and microphones, representing a major breach of privacy. Cell site simulators, which mimic cell towers to collect data from nearby devices, raise concerns about tracking innocent individuals alongside suspects. The increased use of drones for surveillance, while helpful for search and rescue, raises alarms about potential invasions of private spaces. The RCMP's consideration of facial recognition and the integration of AI further heightens privacy risks, with concerns about misidentification, bias, and transparency. As these technologies proliferate, the need for stronger safeguards and oversight grows. to ensure they do not erode individual freedoms or compromise ethical standards. So why is it that the RCMP needs all of these new invasive technologies to monitor everyday citizens, yet doesn't take action towards already known widespread organized crime within our nation?
Well, I think a couple things. First, they're clearly compromised in some fashion, whether they are or the people in charge are. We kind of already know the liberals are. We've seen it. There's enough evidence out there that it's unequivocal. So I think that's why you're not seeing them push back against sort of the organized crime. I actually believe like organized crime is a cog in the economic wheel. And it's like every government has them. And I think you either know who they are or you're in bed with them. I think it's one of the two. In our nation, it seems like there's a benefit to be in bed with them because that's how they maintain power, which is, I imagine, what these foreign nations do. I imagine these foreign nations go, we're better off and we have much more robust safeguards if we are in with the politicians. So what do they want? And what we know they want is they want to maintain power. So how can we give them power so that we can do whatever we want over here with a safety net? That's exactly what's happened in this country. I'm sure it happens all over the place, but definitely here. So in terms of why the RCMP is not acting on those people, I believe that's your primary reason. In terms of why do they need all these invasive technologies, it's kind of interesting, right? So when these technologies come out, you kind of get into this game. It's kind of like a nuclear arms race in a sense. If you don't use them, someone else is going to. So you kind of want to have a hold of these tools. It's like you want the best spy tools because there's people spying on you anyway. It's going to happen. So I'm not really opposed to the RCMP or CSIS using these things. The problem I have is them using them domestically, using them against our people, which it seems like they will very likely do. Because like you said earlier, you can have power, but the more you use it, the more likely it is to be corrupted. It's just the way it's going to go. Humans are very predictable in that sense, right? It's kind of like flipping a coin. Eventually, it's going to be heads. Don't care how many times tails come up. So you sort of look at that situation. You go, well, they're going to do good with these things. Well, we already know that they're not willing to go after organized criminals. So no, they're not. We already know that they protect our politicians, who we know are doing corrupt and criminal things. And we see even things like we see a two-tier justice system depending on your political allegiance too. You know, and I say that because you look at kind of what happened with what we know about the Coots border case and how those people got thrown in jail, which seems very unjust at this point, versus the pro-Palestinian stuff, just for example. And I don't care about anybody's allegiance on the Palestine side. I just mean how the RCMP and the police are not behaving in the same way. It's two-tiered because one aligns with the political party. So these people have already shown that they're not acting in a fair and just way for Canadians at scale. Anyway, it's this kind of thing where they're sort of telling you to already self-censor because I've already got these tools and I'm already watching you. That's what it feels like a little bit, right? Because if you know, hey, I can infiltrate your digital device, I can listen to you, I can see you. You go, fuck, okay, well, I'm definitely going to curb some of the things that I'm saying. I mean, you can't pretend. You've probably done this before. You've been saying something that you know is absolutely ludicrous, but you're like, is my phone beside me? You've probably thought about that because you're like, is someone actually listening? They just said that they are.
One of the things that when it comes to surveillance in totalitarian regimes is what you were just pointing out there is exactly the reason they employ these things is because they know that people act differently when those people know that they're being observed. It automatically drives forward obedience within the population if everyone thinks they're under surveillance all the time. And we've seen this with historical regimes. So even in East Germany, the Stasi, man, you go look at what they were doing even back in like the 1960s, 70s, and 80s when technology was much more limited than it is today. The amount of surveillance that they had on citizens was truly crazy. They had documents and dossiers on everybody.
Yeah, you told me they had smell jars.
Yes,
that is the most insane shit I've ever heard.
So they would like say bring somebody in for interrogation, put them through the ringer, and then afterwards they would like wipe down the seat that person was sitting on and put that rag into like a jar. And then if something ended up happening in public, they would get smell dogs to go and smell the public space and then bring that dog back to the Stasi headquarters and be like, find the jar that
which
matches
one of these butt
smell.
jars? Whose butt was there? What was happening?
Or the Stasi would just break into your house when you weren't there and take samples of stuff. It was nuts.
That's wild.
And to the point where if they found anything that was out of place, like so for instance, things like George Orwell's Animal Farm was blacklisted. So if they found that book in your house, then all of a sudden the Stasi would say that you're a counter-revolutionary, and every single employer within East Germany had to check in with the Stasi before they could actually employ somebody. So let's say I was just curious and I wanted to read George Orwell's point of view. They break into my house, find my book, they list me as a counter-revolutionary. Now, anytime I go apply for a job anywhere, the Stasi will just be like, don't hire that guy. And then I'm just put to, like, I'm just exiled essentially. And I was actually thinking about this in regards to all this surveillance stuff. This was something that Edward Snowden was pointing out at the Bitcoin conference, especially when it comes to like AI, is they don't even need the human resources to do this anymore. Like AI can just scan everything you do all the time with your data on your phone. And then just, he was saying that people will just become determined as like anomalies. And if you're an anomaly to the way that we want our society to run, well, then your banking will just you'll have trouble getting loans. You'll have troubles getting employed. They'll just put like a digital like asterisk beside you.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think about that being in the world where it's just automated like that. And this was something I was saying, because like you read this stuff about, say, East Germany and the Stasi, and you go, wow, that's so invasive. I can't believe they do that. But then you think about what we're currently living under, not even say the forecast of what you and I are talking about things could be like a decade from now, is like, okay, well, you know, you read, yes, the Stasi would have known where everybody was at any given point or day, whatever. But then it's like, well, we have that on our phones. Like people can access, we already live under that.
I think the big difference you have is they put lipstick on this pig. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So it looks better, but it's the same nonsense. And it's weird. They've done a really, really great job of convincing people we still live under sort of a system of democracy that benefits society. So people believe that. So they don't believe that any of the things that come from all these maybe worse ideologies could possibly have penetrated our system. But it's like, no. They're just using the veil of democracy. Everything on the inside is completely corrupt and rotten. They're using all the same tools from all these other places, and you're seeing it. And you and I pointed out, we go, hey, they're doing X, Y, and Z. That means A, B, and C. You can see it's already happening. The tools are just more advanced at this point. People go, no. We live in democracy, Jonathan. Okay, I guess you keep playing this game.
Well, I think this is why we're kind of more like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World in a sense than, say, agreed. Orwell's 1984, is because we accept all of these totalitarian measures out of convenience and consumerism rather than it being pushed down our throats or like our faces being stamped on with a boot by like Orwell prophesized. But they're
catching flies with honey.
Exactly. Yeah. And we just willingly do it to ourselves. And that was one of the hallmarks of Brave New World, was that like all the citizens lived in this authoritarian regime, but they like actively wanted it. They wished for it because it was comforting. And so I think that's where we are in a sense where, you tell people these kind of things and we love our phones so much or whatever that when you point this thing out to people, it's like they almost just want to block the authoritarian aspect of it and just go, no. This is good for me. I like this machine. Don't remind me about the negative aspects.
I don't know how we break free.
Well, that's something that I was even thinking about. Like my dream would be able to have somebody eventually just do all of the frontward facing online stuff for me and just like write on a typewriter and just send it off to somebody and just be like, put this into digital format for everyone to listen to. But it's funny because you can't do that yet. Like it's almost like you have to jump out of it. Like you have to ascend to a certain level before you can unplug from it.
100%. You and I aren't there yet. Like you have to have a certain level of success, whether it's monetary or whether it's credibility, scale, following, whatever metric you want to use. You have to break through. You have to get over the hump, and then it all starts to make sense. Then you can dictate. I often use the music industry as an example. You do what you have to do to get into the music industry. Like, Beyonce with Destiny's Child, it's Meg's favorite artist. She just did a country album.
Right.
Country-ish, rap country, whatever. So you see, like, once she got in, she did a lot of other things, but I use that as an example because it's the sort of the striking dichotomy between the two. Is you get in however you want, then you can do whatever you like after that. You have the freedom to do whatever you want. It's just how do you get into that space? And each space requires a different accomplishment. So if you and I want to get there, it might be years, it might be several more years of doing stuff like this before you can actually go live somewhere in Wyoming and no one fucking knows you're there, and you're using carrier pigeon to send your typewriter, pages off to somebody and whatever. But it's, you need to sort of cross that threshold, whatever that looks like, which is tough because I think that's what makes it so challenging to change, is to get to that point and to have that kind of freedom. And I think that's what deters a lot of people. I'm going a little bit off tangent, but it's like, you don't want to, like you, for example, you don't want to be in the spotlight. You don't want to be, it's not really your thing. To be honest with you, I don't really like it either. I don't mind it, but I don't vie for it. But for you to actually get to the point where you can affect change at scale, you have to get more and more, and you have to go further into the lion's den of doing things you don't want to do till you finally get to the point where you can affect change without having all the negative aspects of it. I think that's why it's so hard for people to sort of accomplish their goals sometimes, because you have to dig through so much shit to get to where you want to go. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%.
But yeah, and they make it, and for guys like you and I doing the things that we do, saying the things that we say, and with the tools they currently have, it just makes it harder and harder and harder.
Well, just even think about that. That is a story that's been with humans since time. You even look at like mythological stories, right? The bigger the dragon, the bigger the treasure. And you have to first get past that dragon in order to get the treasure.
Right.
It's like, that's a very ingrained story and mythological story within our psyche, but it's very true. It's like the bigger, you have to, that shit you have to dig through is worse depending what's better on the other side.
Yep. Totally agreed.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got a federal court ruling, lawsuit calling for Canada to halt UNRWA funding to proceed. The federal court has allowed a lawsuit to proceed, rejecting Ottawa's attempt to block a case challenging Canada's funding to the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, or UNRWA. The lawsuit, filed by the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, or CIJA, and families of victims of the October Hamas attacks, claims Canadian aid indirectly supports Hamas and violates foreign aid laws that require alignment with Canadian values. UNRWA denies ties to Hamas, though Canada briefly suspended funding after reports surfaced of UNRWA staff involved in the attacks. While aid resumed in March, the UN fired 9 staff members for Hamas connections. Plaintiffs argue humanitarian aid could have been delivered through other channels. The court ruled that the lawsuit's claims fall within its jurisdiction, allowing the case to move forward. So, should the Canadian government be held responsible for funding UNRWA and by association Hamas?
Yeah, it seems pretty clear, right? I mean, look, there are people doing bad things on both sides. You can say that to contextualize the situation so everyone doesn't feel offended. But here's the reality. Canada, which is where the money's coming from, the Canadian government, that institution has said that Hamas is a terrorist organization. Check that box. Next, UNRWA has said, they've come out now and said at least 9 members of UNRWA are part of Hamas, for sure. And like the active military component, not just supporters. So you look at that and you go, okay, so you definitely, and they say 9, and there was another 19, I think, that were suspected. You know, that's a drop in a bucket, but let's just say that's what we can prove. So we go with that. So we have up to 28 people that are in the organization that they either are definitely involved in military action, Hamas, or suspected to be rather. So that says the organization is corrupt, right? Like they are being infiltrated by a group that we consider terrorists. How do you continue funding them? It actually makes no sense at all. And you can argue like, oh, well, the good outweighs the bad, which I think what a lot of people do, where they turn a blind eye. There are other organizations that you can fund to accomplish these goals. It doesn't have to be this group. So for me, yeah, I mean, they should bear some responsibility. And I think the funding should stop for these groups. Again, I'm not saying don't help out people that need the assistance. I'm saying don't use a group that has definitely been infiltrated by people we call and consider and have designated terrorists. It doesn't make any sense.
I don't get how we're funding both sides of this shit. Like
that's pretty common though.
Yeah, but like, you look at it and it's like, okay, we're sending billions of dollars to not necessarily just Canada, but like in general, the international community is sending billions of dollars to Palestine and billions of dollars to Israel. And then it's like that famous meme where they take a picture of Israel and Palestine and it's the missiles going both way. And it's like my tax dollars over one of them. And then it's like somehow my tax dollars on the other one. You're like, yeah. And then you're like, what the fuck are we doing here?
Yeah.
And what's crazy is like on all of this, you know, this is what we'll get a little bit kind of deeper into it, but like it's so obvious that international aid is being stolen by Hamas. Like, you even look at the GDP of the Gaza Strip. So in 2023, according to the World Bank, the GDP worth of Gaza was $17.4 billion,
right,
which is staggeringly low. But the top three Hamas leaders have a combined net worth of approximately $11 billion. So tell me, how does the leadership of a country have as much of a net worth as the GDP of that country? It doesn't make sense. All that money must be coming from somewhere else. They don't even have enough money to take from that, essentially. I know it's a little bit less, but overall,
no, of course. Society wouldn't function if you were moving that kind of capital.
Yeah. And so you look at this and you go, like, to put that into perspective, that would be like Trudeau, Freeland, and Gubeau. Like, let's just take three randoms. That would be like those three leaders having a combined net worth of $2.11 trillion in Canada. Like, that's the same kind of level. So it just, come on. Like, they're stealing this. And then you even see too, even after the whole October thing, you can see there's footage of it. Anybody can go watch this, where there's Hamas people getting in and out of UN vehicles. It's like, of course, all this international aid is just being used for this purpose. I don't get it.
I feel like a lot of our international aid is used to pad pockets of corrupt people.
Oh, yeah.
In general. Like, I feel like, what I say government efficiency and spending is 20%. I would say I would say spending efficiency on foreign aid, like 10%. But that's what I imagine. I imagine the other 90% goes to making these guys billionaires. But it's like, I ask these questions sometimes. If we're funding both sides of this war, which is pretty apparent, where's the benefit? Who benefits? Why? Why are these things happening? There must be a reason. It's not just throwing money. Because if there's no benefit, let them kill each other. Who cares? Like, theoretically speaking. So cool. You guys do your thing over there. We'll stay over here. So what's the value add? Why are we doing this?
Well, I think it's because this is just like, again, this is one of those pawn situations within this, right? Whether it's you've had the Middle East. I mean, even you go look back at the 1960s. Actually, this is so wild. Is Mao was instrumental in Palestine's quote unquote liberation goals throughout the 1900s, where he was actually the one that said you need to, and told this to the Palestinians, was that you guys need to start pushing on the humanitarian aspect. Like, stop trying to...
Don't be a tough guy.
Stop trying to be a tough guy. Play the victim.
Yeah.
And you'll all of a sudden win over all the hearts of the Americans. And that's what you see happening. It's actually crazy. You can see there's photos of Hamas leaders and soldiers reading Mao's little red book, which was like his communist...
manifesto?
Of sorts. It was just like a assortment of his quotes telling people how to be a good communist. But, but yeah, so you see that this kind of where it goes when it comes to the sympathy that you can have for Palestinian people.
Honestly, that's what this whole thing is built on. It's built on people pretending to be or being sympathetic for a cause because people are playing a victim, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like, I understand atrocious things are happening. I get that. But it's framing yourself and putting yourself in that position, which is kind of what it seemed like the leaders in Hamas were doing this whole time. It seems like their plan is going perfectly to plan.
Well, let's even give them the benefit of the doubt, and let's say that the people that are hyper concerned over there about Israel and saying that Israel is the sole reason that these atrocities are happening. Like, even give the benefit of the doubt. We'll say that that's true. Even if tomorrow Israel was gone, that region would not all of a sudden have peace. What you would see is tomorrow Hamas and the PLO would go to war for who would be the authority over the Palestinian region.
Yeah.
Another war would kick off tomorrow, even if Israel was wiped off the map. So like this whole notion, to me, when it comes to how do you deal with the situation, is like, you have to stop radicalizing this group of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, which they have been for decades upon decades upon decades, like a long time. Even I implore people, if they're extremely upset about this situation, like, go look, you can just Google it. go look at what they teach kids in Palestinian schools. I was actually just watching one yesterday morning. There was the school had got the children to put on a play of Palestinian martyrs stabbing Jewish people. And so they had like certain little Palestinians kids dressed up like Jewish kids, and then certain Palestinians dressed up in like Kiafas, the Hamas headwear. And then the whole story of the play was these Palestinian kids stabbing the Jewish representing kids. And then everybody was like cheering and stuff. And you're just like, yeah, this is what they're teaching kids from the beginning, is that the most noble thing they can do within their entire lives is kill Jewish people.
That's insane.
So it's like, look, I do have sympathy for those people that, yes, they're brainwashed from the time that they are born. But like, if you don't deal with that problem, then like this conflict is going to go on forever.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I often say, like, if you want to affect significant change in society, you have to start with the youngest generation, and you have to basically do it wherever they're being educated. It's kind of where all these things, which is what concerns me so much about the ideology in schools today in Canada and the United States, is this is the generation that's coming up, and this is what you're teaching them. It's going to mean a really, really tough future, a few generations of a tough future, right? So yeah, no, I mean, that does make sense, but as far as the Canadian government continuing funding, I think it's a firm no. I don't see how you can continue doing it.
I don't know how either. And like people will say like, oh, well, the Palestinians, they need these supplies. And they do. Like, of course, the people in Palestine are living in terrible conditions. But again, you can go watch videos of this. Watch what happens when they drop these aid packages. You can see they'll like drop them out of the sky from planes into onto these beaches where the refugees areas are. And what you can see is everybody starts trying to fight over them, which you can understand. But then you'll see Hamas come in and essentially take over. They will kill Palestinian people in order to get that aid, so that they're the ones in control of all the supplies of the region, and then they can hold it over the Palestinian people's heads. There was one I saw where they loaded all of the supplies, the humanitarian aid, onto the back of a truck, and then literally were driving through crowds of Palestinian people. Now, most of them were getting out of the way, but like a few definitely got hit. And so this is what we're funding when you send all of this money there. And so, like, until you deal with that problem, like, I'm sorry, I don't support giving aid to these people.
Yeah, we're aligned. Tough time.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Putin threatens war as Western allies near deal on missile strikes in Russia. Britain and the US will hold a critical summit at the White House today to discuss allowing Ukraine to use Western-supplied missiles to strike targets inside Russia. This follows warnings from Russian President Vladimir Putin that such an agreement would be seen as NATO's direct involvement in the war. The meeting comes amid heightened tensions, including alleged Iranian missile shipments to Russia, which have shifted Western perspectives. Despite past reluctance due to escalation risks, the US and UK are now considering expanding Ukraine's strike capabilities in response to Russian aggression in recent developments. US and UK officials aim to finalize guidelines on what targets Ukraine can hit, while also addressing broader strategic concerns about the war's progression into 2025. So is the West openly pushing for all-out war against Russia at this point?
Well, there's a couple things that make you think that way, would make one think that, they're planning strategic progression into 2025, but they're already planning to be funding Ukraine for the next 5 years. Like Canada, America, they've got long-term funding strategies, the EU. This is not short-term. So it does seem like they're the ones dictating. They're also the ones that are telling Ukraine what they can and can't do. You can use our weapons to do this, you can't, which means who's really in charge? And now you've got this Iran ballistic missile issue. Both Iran and Russia have said, we did not participate in this trade at all. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But there's some weird photos that popped up being like, this is the ship, it happened. Okay. So Iran's like, we didn't give them any ICBMs, or just ballistic missiles, whatever they are. And Russia's like, we didn't get any from these guys. This did not happen. Okay. What would be the point in denying that? You're in a war. There's going to be sides that are going to be fighting each other, and they're already aligned with Iran. So I don't even know why they're taking weapons from North Korea openly. So why would they be like, well, we're not getting weapons from them? If they are, why would they do that? It doesn't really track for Russia's behavior or Iran's. They want to slap America in the face. They don't care. So if they are doing it, I don't see why either side would be like, no, we're not. And now what they're saying, this just popped up the other day. Now they're saying that Russia and Iran are teaming up for some sort, their nuclear programs are connecting. there's no evidence of this, like none. So what they're saying is, this is what they put in the news. Because Iran gave Russia missiles, which both sides deny, Russia must be giving them nuclear, whatever it is, nuclear technology, nuclear assistance, let's call it, assistance in nuclear weapons, helping them become more armed. And they go, and we know Iran is enriching their uranium, which is still not weapons grade for the most part, apparently. So you kind of look at all this and it's like, it sounds to me like the West is creating a situation where they can go on the attack much more and have evidence to back their decision. And that first move would be allowing using Western weapons to strike inside Russia. So I hate to say it because I'm not trying to align with Iran or Russia. It's not my intention. But when I look at all the information, it seems a little fabricated, and it seems like the West is the one that may be instigating at this point. Not overall, not the whole war. That's not what I'm saying. Some people can argue that, but that's not, this is more of an isolated issue that I'm looking at. In terms of them pushing this war forward, and in terms of them trying to be okay with launching Western weapons inside Russia, it looks like they're creating the scenario so that it's okay for them to do that. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, that's kind of what I get here as well, is like, look, you can look at, say, Russia and Iran and be like, yeah, these are not good actors on the global stage. I wouldn't want to live under Putin's rule. I definitely would not want to live under the Ayatollah's rule.
No.
If you look, yeah, again, at the last couple decades of history, it's we've been encroaching on them. We've been pushing more and more of their past allies, like Ukraine, into our hands. And of course, that's just not going to go well. If Russia was seeking influence over Mexico, we would be in the exact same position. We would be doing the exact same thing Russia is doing today. And so when it comes to this, like, I do think that the Western world wants global dominance. You know, we've been talking even about the whole censorship campaigns that are happening here. This is in attempt to uphold the global order. But I think that this is where they're also trying to push the whole Russia situation, is to the point where they can push Russia further and further back into a corner, and then Russia will strike back. And then that, just like you were saying, gives them the pretext to hit them harder and say, well, what did you want us to do? Yeah. And look, again, in that scenario, I actually understand it. Like, okay, if Russia did do that, if, let's say, Russia did attack another country outside of Ukraine, it's like, yeah, you have to deal with that situation. But like, let's also not try to put the scenario in the place where we force them to do that, and then that's their only option we give them. But it seems like, to me, that's more and more what we're pushing for. Yeah,
it's kind of like you can condemn Russia for how they act on the global stage. You can condemn Russia for invading Ukraine, but then you can also go, I can condemn NATO for continuing to move east. I can do that. You continue to encroach, so you can understand the actions. And then you can say this exact same situation. You can go, okay, Russia is still fighting a war in Ukraine. There's still hundreds of thousands of kids dying unnecessarily. You know, they've still invaded what was once a neutral state, which is no longer. And, you know, maybe Ukraine should have the right to launch a counterattack, and maybe with their own weapons or whatever. You can say that. But then you can also say, okay, but it looks like the West is sort of fabricating a situation, or potentially fabricating a situation here to make it okay to sort of counterstrike with their weapons. So it kind of, you see both sides again, right? That's kind of all I'm trying to highlight, is this is not cut and dry. And from my perspective, it does look like the West is, I'm not trying to comment on whether or not it's right or wrong. Just more so, it does look like the West is sort of instigating and maybe fabricating a little bit to do what they want to do. That's kind of what I'm seeing.
And what's crazy is this will instantly get you labeled like a Putin puppet or a Russian propagandist or falling for all this, right?
Sure.
The thing that I would say is, in this situation, when it comes to wars, like, if you're rooting for one side of the war, then the chances are you're the one that's falling for propaganda, whether it be one or the other.
Yeah.
And most of the time, this is how I see all wars, is it's like the average person that just wants to live their life and has no ambitions of world domination or power. Those people that exist, the majority, and that's the majority of people in every single country on this planet, I think, I am with those people. I am with
Yes.
the Ukrainian citizens that just want to live their lives. I'm with the Russian citizens that just want to live their lives. I'm with the Western citizens that just want to live their lives. And I'm opposed to all of these regimes that use these people as dispensable bodies that can be thrown into war machines for their own personal ambition.
Yeah, like I constantly say, like, war is the failure of man. This is the lowest operating level of humans, to be at war with one another, just maiming all these kids and ruining these generations. I totally agree. We're on the exact same page. I think the comment is really on the small number of mainly men who are operating within the organizations of NATO, Western governments, significant Western governments, and obviously Russia and these other Eastern governments. So this is really a comment on like a dozen people at the top and how they're behaving. Unfortunately, they're able to use their entire nations and beyond that to sort of as a proxy to fight these, or to have these sort of disagreements or wars, you know? So,
well, one thing that I think about in regards to this is like, I think the saddest thing that comes to all these wars is you look at this pure numbers of people that die in these wars, like tens upon tens of millions. If you look back at like say World War I or II,
yep.
I am of the mind that human progress is usually done by a select few individuals that make great achievements to the human race. So like, for instance, the Elon Musks of the world that all of a sudden make space travel a thing again, and also are doing it cheaper than any government, or the Newtons of the world, or whatever. These select few people that just like break open the paradigm and show us a new way forward. It's like, how many of those people were sacrificed in those 100? It's like there could have been like they're rare, but that's like maybe throughout those wars, like 50 to 100 people that could have like changed humanity for the better,
right direction.
Ended up dying in a trench for some rich person's or some powerful fucking leader. That is how I see a lot of it. I think that's an important. I think I appreciate the contextualization from your side too, because sometimes I just stumble through it a little bit, but that is my perspective. It's like my comments on Russia and Ukraine are really about those people at the top, because I'm really on the same page as you. You can meet probably 99% of the people fighting this war and enjoy sitting down and having a beer with them, or getting to know them, or they could be friends with one of your buddies and they're perfectly good humans. I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of these people, but they're being thrown into these meat grinders because of these idiots. And I just think like when I kind of pull back, you know, sort of what's happening in the media, trying to stitch these stories together, these are the idiots that feel like they're doing it to these ones a little bit right now. Yeah. All right, last story for the day. Donald Trump targeted in a second assassination attempt at West Palm Beach golf course. Former President Donald Trump narrowly escaped a second assassination attempt in 2 months while golfing at his West Palm Beach course. Ryan Ruth, a 58-year-old from Hawaii, armed with a scoped AK-47, set up a sniper's nest 300 to 500 yards from Trump. A Secret Service agent spotted Ruth just in time and opened fire, causing the suspect to flee. Ruth carried 2 backpacks and a GoPro and was later arrested on a nearby highway. Following the incident, Trump was rushed to Mar-a-Lago, and security has since been increased. Trump reassured supporters, saying he is safe and well, and vowed, "I will never surrender." Will Trump make it to an election?
Probably if he can stay off the golf course. Sorry, man. Like, there's too much foliage. You got to stay off the golf course, dude. I know you like to golf, you know, or just fly to places they don't know where you are and play around and beat it. You got a month, 2 months left. When is the election? Yeah. November 5th? You got a month and a half left. I said there's going to be another attempt on his life. There's another attempt. I think there's going to be a third. I think there's going to be another one. I think the media is making people more extreme with the things that they say. You know, you look at some of the information from this guy. He seems now, I was watching a few things, so I'm going to stitch together some stuff. Don't take it as fact. Don't. Just sort of my thoughts. He's somehow connected to the Russia-Ukraine situation. He apparently went on his own dime to recruit Afghanis to fight in Ukraine, which is a bit odd. His Twitter page looks extremely fabricated. Everything looks like it's parroted from HQ, from somewhere. He's got direct connection with CIA members that follow him back on Twitter. One in particular, which would maybe be a handler. It's hard to say if that's the case or not. So those are the things that seem sort of clear in terms of his support of the Democrats. You know what I mean? He's also been seen wearing, you know, Biden-Harris shirts, so it's pretty clear. Another thing that kind of bothered me, which you sort of come to expect, which is sort of why I made that comment on the media maybe contributing to this guy becoming a little more extreme, is the FBI is calling it an assassination attempt. The news is calling it an apparent assassination attempt. And the other news is covering the fact that Elon Musk said, well, no one's attempted the life of Biden or Harris. So that's what the left-wing news is doing, not, oh my God, a presidential candidate has had 2 attempts on his life in 2 months. What the hell is happening in this country? They go, Elon Musk said something about the left, and we think that's pretty mean. What? And they're like, it's an apparent assassination attempt. The FBI said that it was an assassination attempt. All the evidence we have shows that's exactly what it was. I find that a little challenging. The other thing I would say is this guy's still alive. He didn't kill himself. So if he disappears, that's a pretty clear indication.
I actually think that's going to be one of the biggest things is like, yeah, does he stick around? I mean, look at the whole Lee Harvey Oswald situation, right? It was the day after coming out of one of the holdings where Jack Ruby went up and shot him. And will something like that happen? Will there be an Epstein moment of found hanging in a cell, or something like that? I don't know.
Or does he go MK Ultra and he goes completely batshit crazy?
Yeah, I don't know. If anything of that sort happens, I think it's just like undeniable at that point that this guy was an asset. But yeah, you look at these people, like whether it be him or Crooks, they've just got the fingerprints of intelligence all over them.
Yes.
Like, and again, when it comes to these intelligence agencies, I don't think you'll ever actually be able to know anything. The amount of darkness that these institutions operate in is actually staggering. And so, like, I think this is something that even Brett Weinstein pointed out that I think was brilliant, was that he thinks that even these institutions have certain safeguards in place that, let's say a Trump was to get into office again, that even he wouldn't be able to gain access to the black books of like where their funding has been going, the operations that they've been doing. I mean, this is something even back to the JFK days. We know that the CIA was completely manipulating him and giving him false information or this or that. So like the idea that these institutions are overseen by anybody is just ridiculous. So they're definitely operating out of the purview of the government apparatus at this point.
Yeah. I mean, one of the Weinstein brothers actually made another good point. He sort of broke this down. I'm going to butcher it because he's more intelligent than I am, and it was his idea. And I only heard it once. So it was kind of this idea that we have opposing forms of democracy. So you've got the democracy that keeps all the institutions alive and works at more of a international level. So that is the democratic institutions, let's say. Then you've got democracy like you and I, which believe we can choose. We can choose what to do, and then those people will do what we want them to do, right? But see, how this system works is these people up here, they know that you can't really choose who you want because this is more important to them. So the two types of democracy sort of clash, right? So anytime you've got these two parties, which they've now made a very, very certain to be a two-party system because of the legislation they put in place. So you have to have two people that are a part of the top level of democracy that want to maintain your global institutions, maintain your FBIs, your CIAs, your WHOs, your NATOs. They need to maintain that order, especially from America, because America's kind of always in the driver's seat, right? So they want you to have candidates at the lower level, some that are a part of the institution and some that aren't. Just because what they want to do eventually is they want the people that are not a part of the institution to throw their support towards the ones that are at some point. That way they convince people, the regular person, I still have a choice, because Bernie Sanders said to go vote for Biden. So he's got my support, therefore X. So they want those people, but they have to be very, very certain that the two people that actually get selected for Republicans and Democrats agree with the top level of democracy. Trump does not agree with the top level of democracy. We saw that once. They did everything they could to stop him from breaking it apart. He gets back in again. I think they know it's going to be much more challenging to slow him down. And I don't think they want him there. I think that's the biggest thing. I think this top level, I think they're willing to do almost anything to stop him from getting in because they don't know what it means. So that's why I think you may very well see another attempt on his life.
Yeah. And I think the analogy I've used before is imagine our society like a tanker ship. And then let's say we're on a path that's just straightforward and our destination is a little island, which is hidden behind a larger island in front of it in between our path to our actual preferred destination. Mm-hmm. The CIAs and the FBIs of the world and such, they don't care whether we put somebody behind the wheel that's going to take us left around the bigger island that gets us to our destination, takes us to the right side along the island to get us to our final destination, as long as we're going to that preferred final destination that they want. But as soon as somebody gets a hold of the helm that goes, you know what, I actually don't want to go to that destination you guys want anymore, which is this global order, then all of a sudden you see them go, we can't have that person in charge of this shit.
Exactly.
And so I think the Weinstein brother you're referencing there is Brett Weinstein, where he said, he's like, I think we can all agree that we have some sort of limit on democracy. So where is that limit? That's what we need to figure out now, because it's not that we just have this perfectly operating democracy like we've been sold where the people are in charge. We've got a limited choice of who as long as they both go to the same area.
Yeah. So we're very much aligned. We've been very aligned on this podcast. It's good. Couple white guys with the podcast. What will be interesting is just to sort of watch this unravel and see what happens, how the media spins it. Like, how can you have a guy that's had his life attempted twice? How can you have a guy that's had an attempt on his life twice running for president and it not be all over the media until this guy runs? I mean, for those who were hoping something would happen so he could recover from that debate, this is it. It happened.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And when you look at the last time there's an attempt on a president's life, I believe it was Reagan. I think I'm right. But either way, what I do remember is when you look at the voting map, it was like all but 2 states were red. Everybody voted Republican, because that was kind of how the nation, they're like, oh, you're trying to kill democracy. That's how they saw it. I have to give the media more credit in that they've made this a more even race. Despite what's happened to Trump. But this second time, I mean, come on, like I don't know, it's getting pretty wild. So anyway, I hope we get some real facts here, and hopefully next time you and I do the podcast, we can talk more about it, because I'm interested to see how this plays out. And I think it gives us an opportunity to look under the hood of the deep state, right? So one of the things that I know happened is this guy's social media got wiped very fast. But people knew this was going to happen. So they tracked all of his followers, all the people he was following. They took screenshots of everything. Everyone's already doing videos on it all. I'm like, oh, this is great. So they're not going to be able to hide it all. So societies like citizen journalists are getting better at this. So I imagine when we do our next pod, we'll have some more information to sort of see what's going on.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to remind people, like, we are living in a crazy time, and in the next, it's insane to think that 3 months from now, like, the world could be completely different. Like, if one of these attempts is successful, they could literally cause massive uprising around the world.
Massive revolution. I think if he gets taken out and the details come out, especially if the details come out and it's decided that it was sort of state driven, oh my God, America. I don't even know if we'd be safe this close to the border.
Yeah, the world changes.
Yeah, so fast.
All right. Don't forget to head over to our Substack, where you can subscribe for just $5 a month to get access to original articles, exclusive podcast episodes, and a direct line to Jonathan and myself. And thank you for those who have supported us so far, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.